The first sound of a dying civilization isn't a bomb or a siren. It's a sputter, a weak, wheezing cough from a faucet that, just moments before, was a trusted ally in the war against morning breath. I stood in my kitchen, a coffee mug in one hand and the hollow dread of a man who just wants a quiet Saturday in the other, and listened to my plumbing give up the ghost. Puffed sputter, gurgle, drip, and then silence. A profound, deeply unsettling silence where the hum of water pressure used to be. I tried the sprayer attachment. Nothing. I leaned my head against the cool stainless steel of the sink, a position I usually reserved for hangovers and existential crises. No, I whispered to the empty basin. Not today. Any other day. This was my sanctuary. A beige two-story box in the surgically manicured, aggressively peaceful subdivision of Whispering Pines. I'd traded a corner office overlooking the city's chaotic symphony of traffic and construction for this, the gentle hum of central air, the distant song of a lawnmower, the soul-crushing quiet of a life where the biggest conflict was supposed to be choosing between 6 different shades of greige for the living room wall. I was Alex, a former senior water systems engineer for a major municipality, now a celebrated recluse whose primary professional duty was to transfer numbers from one spreadsheet to another for a company that probably forgot I existed. It was perfect. Or it had been. I tried the bathroom tap. Same pathetic gurgle. I walked to the front door, my bare feet sticking slightly to the hardwood floor in the oppressive July heat, and looked outside. The world was a shimmering, heat-distorted watercolor painting. The sun beat down on the identical houses with a kind of personal animosity. Every lawn, including my own slightly less than perfect one, looked thirsty. Every lawn, that is, except for Brenda's. Brenda lived 2 houses down. Brenda was the president, high chancellor, and supreme arbiter of the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. Her house wasn't just a home. It was a testament to what can be achieved when you have no hobbies, no sense of proportion, and a 300-page book of rules to weaponize. Her lawn wasn't grass. It was an emerald carpet, a verdant miracle that defied the scorching heat wave the local news had been screaming about for a week. Her flower beds weren't just gardens. They were botanical valhallas, riotous explosions of color so perfect they looked like they'd been rendered by a computer. And today, her personal Eden was getting a drink. A very, very big drink. Snaking from the end of our cul-de-sac was a hose. This wasn't some flimsy green vinyl thing you buy at a hardware store. This was an agricultural-grade python, a thick, ribbed monstrosity easily 4 inches in diameter. It slithered across the asphalt, over her pristine curb, and connected to a manifold that fed a half-dozen oscillating sprinklers. They danced and spun with joyous abandon, flinging arcs of water across every inch of her property. The other end of the hose, I saw with a dawning, sickening horror, was plugged directly into the side of a large, ugly beige metal box. Our community's emergency water reserve tank. The tank was my nemesis's monument. It held 50,000 gallons of non-potable water, strictly designated for one purpose: firefighting. In a subdivision like ours, with houses made of wood and hubris packed tightly together, it was the "in case of Armageddon" button. It was not, I was reasonably certain, the "in case Brenda's petunias look a bit peaky" button. I slipped on a pair of flip-flops, the soft slapping sound on the pavement the only noise in the dead calm air. The heat was a physical presence, wrapping around me like a blanket. As I got closer, the fine mist from her sprinklers felt good, which only made me angrier. She was on her porch, of course, sitting in a wicker throne, sipping iced tea from a tall glass that sweated in the heat. She watched her sprinklers with the serene satisfaction of a Roman emperor watching a particularly good gladiator match. "Brenda," I said. My voice came out as a croak. She turned her head slowly, her gaze sweeping over me with the kind of casual disdain she usually reserved for dandelions. Alex, enjoying the weather? There's no water, I said, pointing vaguely back at my own house. In my house. Or anyone else's, I'm guessing. Any idea why that might be? The sarcasm was laid on so thick it was practically a solid. She took a delicate sip of her tea. The city announced Stage 2 restrictions last week. We all got the email. You should really try to keep up. I read the email, Brenda. It said to restrict usage of municipal water. It said nothing about commandeering the entire goddamn fire suppression reserve and creating a private water park on your front lawn. She finally stood up, placing her glass down with a firm click. She was a woman built of sharp angles and unwavering certainty. If you had read the bylaws as carefully as you should have, Alex, you would know that the Community Emergency Preparedness Reservoir is technically community property. My lawn, she said, gesturing to the shimmering green expanse, won Yard of the Month for June, July, and August last year. It is a significant community asset. By maintaining its aesthetic brilliance during this unfortunate dry spell, I am maintaining our collective property values. I stared at her. My brain, the same one that once redesigned the primary water grid for a city of 2 million people, was struggling to process the sheer, weaponized stupidity of her logic. It was a perfect, crystalline sphere of wrongness. Brenda, I said, trying a different tack, the reasonable man approach. That water is for fires. We are in the middle of a record-breaking heat wave. The fire chief was on TV last night practically begging people not to use fireworks this weekend. You are draining the single most important safety feature in this entire neighborhood so your roses don't get droopy. The risk of a fire is purely statistical, she retorted, her voice dripping with condescension. The certainty of my lawn developing brown patches is 100%. The bylaws are very clear in Section 4, subparagraph C, regarding aesthetic uniformity. A brown lawn is a direct violation. I am simply using a community resource to prevent a community violation. It's proactive governance. I felt a vein in my forehead begin to throb in time with the ch-ch-ch-ch of her sprinklers. There was no reasoning with this woman. Arguing with Brenda was like trying to teach physics to a brick wall, except the brick wall wouldn't fine you for having mismatched patio furniture. So you're not going to turn it off? Not until my lawn's soil has reached its optimal moisture saturation, she said, picking up her glass. I have a meter for it. I'm not an amateur. I turned and walked away, defeated. The sound of her sprinklers felt like a personal insult. My house was a tinderbox with no water pressure. My neighbors were in the same boat, and the Queen of Whispering Pines was giving her gladioli a spa day with our only line of defense. As I reached my driveway, a new sound cut through the air. The high-pitched whine of my neighbor Dave's electric lawnmower sputtering to a stop. He looked over at me, his face a mask of sweaty confusion. Hey, Alex, my hose won't work. The city shut us off. Worse, I said, gesturing with my thumb toward Brenda's house. The Queen has decreed a mandatory irrigation. Dave's eyes followed my thumb, widened at the sight of the industrial hose, and then filled with the familiar, defeated resignation of a man who has lost too many battles over the acceptable height of his hedges. Oh no, he whispered. Not again. Back inside my blessedly cool house, the silence from the pipes seemed to mock me. I paced my living room, a caged animal in a beige prison. I was a problem solver. My entire life had been a series of complex puzzles involving flow rates, pressure dynamics, and infrastructure logistics. I didn't just deal with problems. I engineered elegant, efficient, and often overwhelming solutions. I had retired from that life for peace, but the beast was still inside me, and Brenda had just poked it with a very large, very pointy stick. My rage coalesced into a single, beautiful, terrible thought. It arrived fully formed, a gift from the spiteful gods of engineering. A memory surfaced from the deep archives of my brain. A meeting from years ago. A developer, a city planner, and a younger, more ambitious version of me, all hunched over a blueprint of this very subdivision. "The tank's refill system needs to be fast," the fire marshal had said. "I don't want a trickle feed. If we use it, I want it full again by the time the trucks are back at the station." I had designed that system. I knew its secrets. I knew its glorious, beautiful, overpowered heart. A slow, malicious grin spread across my face. It felt unfamiliar, like stretching a muscle I hadn't used in years. "Proactive governance," I muttered to myself. "Okay, Brenda, let's govern." I went to my garage. It was my one area of rebellion, a chaotic mess of tools and old projects that Brenda had once tried to fine me for leaving the door open for more than an hour. I kicked aside a box of old server parts and opened a heavy-duty steel cabinet. There it was, sitting at the bottom like King Arthur's sword in the stone. A T-handle valve wrench, 4 feet long, with a specialized hexagonal head. A relic from my old life I'd kept for sentimental reasons. Today, its purpose was anything but sentimental. Wrench in hand, I walked out the back door, cutting through my parched lawn and hopping the low fence into the community green space that ran behind our houses. The emergency tank stood there, fat and smug. But I wasn't interested in the tank itself. I was interested in what was 20 yards behind it, half hidden by an overgrown azalea bush. A green metal plate, flush with the ground, a utility access point. I pried it open with the end of the wrench. Below it was a dark, cool space, and the heart of the beast. A massive, recessed bolt head the size of my fist. This wasn't some delicate little knob. This was the master valve connecting the 50,000-gallon emergency tank directly to the 24-inch regional supply main, a subterranean river of water moving with enough force to service a small town. It was designed for rapid, catastrophic refilling. It was designed for my exact brand of malicious compliance. I lowered the wrench into the hole, the hexagonal head seated over the bolt with a satisfying, solid clunk. I planted my feet, gripped the T-handle, and heaved. For a second, nothing happened. The bolt was stiff from disuse. I gritted my teeth, put my back into it, and pulled again. There was a deep, groaning screech of metal on metal, a sound that echoed up from the bowels of the earth. Then it gave. I turned it a full 90 degrees until it locked into the open position. The effect was instantaneous and deeply, profoundly satisfying. A low whoomp vibrated through the ground, like a giant clearing its throat. The pipes leading into the bottom of the tank shuddered. On the side of the tank was a simple, mechanical water level gauge, a red needle behind a glass pane. I had watched Brenda drain it for what must have been hours. I watched it refill. The needle, which had been resting limply on empty, sprang to life. It didn't creep up, it zipped. It shot past the 1/4 mark, then the 1/2 mark, with the speed of a car's speedometer during a burnout. The entire tank began to hum, a deep bass thrum of immense pressure. I could hear the roar of thousands of gallons a minute surging into the vessel. I glanced at my watch. 3 minutes and 40 seconds. The needle hit the full mark. A moment later, a pressure release valve on the very top of the tank, a failsafe I had insisted on, let out a triumphant pshhh. A plume of cool mist shot 20 feet into the air, shimmering in the oppressive sunlight like a geyser of pure, unadulterated victory. I grunted with effort, turning the valve back to the closed position. The roaring stopped. The The geyser subsided. Silence returned. I put the cover back on the access point, kicked some dirt over it for good measure, and walked back towards my house, the heavy wrench feeling as light as a feather. As I rounded the corner of my house, a new symphony of sounds reached me. The water pressure, now restored and perhaps even slightly overpressurized from the sudden surge, was wreaking havoc on Brenda's finely tuned irrigation system. One of her sprinklers had broken free from its base and was whipping around on the end of its hose like a crazed snake, spraying water wildly across her porch, her windows, and her perfectly arranged wicker furniture. I allowed myself a small, tight smile. The game was on. I had maybe 10 minutes of pure, unadulterated bliss. 10 minutes of standing in my kitchen, running the tap just to watch the beautiful, uninterrupted stream of water splash into the sink. The pressure was magnificent. I could have sandblasted the siding off my house with the showerhead upstairs. It was in the middle of this quiet celebration that the screaming started. It wasn't a scream of terror. It was a scream of pure, distilled rage, a sound that could curdle milk from 3 houses away. It was, unmistakably, Brenda. I looked out the window. She was standing on my lawn. Not on the sidewalk, not on the driveway, but planted squarely in the middle of my grass, a flag of indignation on conquered territory. She was soaked. Her carefully coiffed hair was plastered to her head, and her beige linen outfit was clinging to her in a most unflattering way. She was pointing a trembling finger at my front door. "Alex! You get out here! Now!" I took my time. I poured myself a large glass of that wonderfully high-pressure tap water, added some ice, and strolled to the door, opening it with a calm I did not entirely feel. Adrenaline is a funny thing. "Brenda," I said, taking a sip. "You're all wet. Sprinkler trouble?" "You did this!" she shrieked, water dripping from the tip of her nose. "You sabotaged my irrigation system. You flooded my porch. This is vandalism. I am calling the police." "First," I said, leaning against the doorframe, "it's not sabotage if the system fails because it's being subjected to pressure it was never designed for. That's just shoddy equipment. Second, I didn't touch your sprinklers. I just fixed the neighborhood water problem. You're welcome, by the way." Her face went from furious to apoplectic. It was a terrifying and fascinating transformation, like watching a tomato ripen in fast forward. You tampered with municipal infrastructure. That is a federal offense. You will go to jail, Alex. I will see you in jail." "Brenda, it's a community well, not a nuclear reactor. And you were the one who started this whole mess by draining it. I just put the water back. Think of it as a civic duty." Her response was drowned out by the approaching siren. I had to give her credit. When Brenda said she was calling the cops, she wasn't bluffing. A cruiser from the local PD rolled up to the curb, its lights painting lazy red and blue strokes across our houses. 2 officers got out. One was older, with a gut that had won a long, slow war against his duty belt, and a face etched with the kind of weariness that can't be faked. The other was young, sharp, and looked like he still believed he could make a difference. Miller and Thompson, the classic duo. Miller, the veteran, took in the scene with a single, sweeping gaze. Brenda, drenched and furious. Me, calm and hydrated. The rogue sprinkler still twitching feebly on Brenda's lawn. He sighed, a deep, profound exhalation of a man who knew his Saturday was officially ruined. "Folks," he said, his voice gravelly, "what seems to be the problem here?" "Officer," Brenda started, marching towards them. "Arrest this man. He deliberately and maliciously tampered with the public water supply. He caused a pressure surge that destroyed my property. It's an act of domestic terrorism." Miller looked at me. His eyes were tired, but sharp. "Sir, did you tamper with the big water tank at the end of the street?" "Officer," I began, adopting my most reasonable tone. Let's establish a timeline. Approximately 2 hours ago, this woman, I gestured to Brenda, single-handedly drained 50,000 gallons of our community's emergency fire reserve during a county-wide fire warning to water her prize-winning petunias. This action cut off the water supply to every other house on this block. Thompson, the rookie, was dutifully taking notes. So the initial event was the draining of the tank? Correct, I said. Seeing as how this created a significant public safety hazard, and I happen to have some professional experience in water systems management, I took the initiative to rectify the situation. I accessed the designated refill valve and replenished the tank from the regional supply main. All I did was refill what she took out. You could call it proactive community maintenance. Brenda sputtered. He has no authority. He used specialized tools. He's not licensed. Miller held up a hand to silence her. He looked back at me. You have professional experience? I was a senior engineer with the city's public works department for 15 years, I said. My name is probably on the original schematics for that very system. A flicker of something, amusement, respect, passed through Miller's eyes. He turned to Thompson. What do you think, kid? Do we have a crime here? Thompson flipped through his notepad, his brow furrowed in concentration. Well, technically, unauthorized access of a utility system could be considered criminal tampering. But the mens rea is complicated. He was mitigating a hazard created by, he looked at Brenda. The initial party. And she was misusing community property, which is a civil matter for the HOA. And his actions didn't cause permanent damage to the utility, they just restored it, aggressively. Miller nodded slowly, letting the rookie work it out. So, what you're saying is, we have a whole lot of paperwork for something that's basically a neighborhood squabble that got out of hand? Essentially, yes, sir, Thompson concluded. Miller turned back to us. Ma'am, he said to Brenda, while I appreciate your commitment to horticulture, you cannot use the emergency water supply for your lawn. That's a serious hazard. Please don't do it again. He then looked at me. And you, sir? While I appreciate your civic-mindedness, you can't go around operating municipal equipment on your own. Next time, call the city. Let them handle it. His expression was stern, but the corner of his mouth twitched. He knew as well as I did that calling the city would have involved a week of phone calls and a stack of forms. So you're not arresting him? Brenda demanded, her voice incredulous. No, ma'am, Miller said, his patience finally wearing thin. There's no crime here that I'm interested in pursuing. This is an HOA matter. Sort it out amongst yourselves. He tipped his hat. Have a nice day, folks. They got back in their car and drove away, leaving a cloud of failure to arrest hanging in the air. Brenda stared at me, her eyes narrowed to slits. She had lost the battle, but I knew with a certainty that chilled my freshly hydrated blood, the war had just begun. She wasn't just the HOA president, she was the HOA, and she was about to bring its full bureaucratic weight down on my head. The first salvo arrived that evening, not by mail, but by text. It was from Dave. Dave. Dude, you need to see this. Neighborhood Facebook group, she's gone nuclear. I logged on. The Whispering Pines Community Forum was usually a sleepy place for lost cat photos and complaints about teenagers. Today, it was a battlefield. Brenda had penned an epistle, a magnum opus of passive aggression and outright lies. A very serious community alert, the headline screamed in bold red letters. Dear neighbors, it is with a heavy heart that I must inform you of a grave security breach that occurred today. A rogue resident, for reasons we can only speculate upon, took it upon himself to illegally access and operate our sensitive water infrastructure. This reckless act caused a dangerous pressure surge, damaging property and endangering the integrity of a system designed to protect us all. While some may be fooled by his claims of helping, know that his actions were unauthorized, dangerous, and a blatant violation of every rule that keeps our community safe and beautiful. The board is reviewing the incident and will take all necessary steps to ensure this kind of vigilantism never happens again. Stay safe, Brenda. The comments were a cesspool. Carol from down the street. Oh my goodness, Brenda, that's terrifying. Thank you for being so on top of things. Brenda's husband, Gerald. Well said, dear. Safety first. Some guy named Bob. What did he even do? Carol. Bob, he's a maniac. Read the post. I scrolled down, my thumb getting tired. A few brave souls tried to defend me. Dave had posted a tentative, I heard he was just refilling the tank after someone else drained it. He was immediately dogpiled by Brenda's loyalists. I had become the neighborhood villain, a shadowy figure who lurked in utility closets and tampered with valves. The next morning, the paper onslaught began. Stuck to my front door with aggressive strips of packing tape were 3 official HOA violation notices. Each was a masterpiece of petty retribution. The first was a $100 fine for unauthorized interaction with community utilities. Fair enough, I saw that one coming. The second was a $50 fine for the condition of my lawn. The violation was listed as failure to maintain consistent greenery, accompanied by a blurry photo of a small brown patch near my driveway that had been there for a month. The third was the real killer. It wasn't a fine, but a notice to comply. It stated that a recent visual inspection, read, Brenda standing on my lawn screaming at me, had revealed that the exterior paint on my house, a perfectly acceptable shade of beige called Desert Whisper, was showing signs of environmental wear and fading inconsistent with community standards. I was given 30 days to have the entire house repainted in an approved color from the HOA palette. The estimated cost for that was probably $5,000. This was no longer about water. This was a declaration of total war. Brenda couldn't get me arrested, so she was going to bleed me dry with 1,000 paper cuts, using the CC and Rs as her blade. I spent the rest of the day in a state of simmering rage, pacing my house and reading the 300-page document of covenants, conditions, and restrictions. It was a legal labyrinth, a beautifully constructed trap, designed to ensure that no homeowner could ever truly be in the right. Every clause was a dead end. Until I found it. It was late. I was on my 3rd cup of coffee, my eyes burning from staring at the screen. I was in a dusty, forgotten annex of the document, a section titled Addendums and Ancillary Structures. The rules were ironclad about anything visible from the street. Fences, sheds, mailboxes, you name it. But they were shockingly, beautifully vague about subterranean installations. There was a clause about needing city permits for any major plumbing or electrical work, but as long as the project was not visible from the street level and did not alter the forward-facing aesthetic of the property, the HOA had almost no grounds to stop it. A plan began to form. A glorious, expensive, disruptive, and beautifully petty plan. It was an engineering problem, and I was an engineer. Brenda had weaponized the community's water supply. Fine. I would take myself off her grid entirely. I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to escalate this conflict into an art form. I was going to build my own water supply, a private, oversized, state-of-the-art water storage and pressurization system buried right in my own yard. I'd have perfect pressure, endless water, and complete immunity from her hydro-tyranny. And the best part? The installation process would be the single loudest, messiest, most gloriously inconvenient event this quiet, pristine little neighborhood had ever witnessed. My revenge would be loud, legal, and exquisitely malicious. The first step was to find an army. Or, more accurately, a guy with a backhoe who wasn't afraid of Brenda. Dave knew a guy. His name is Gus, he'd told me in a hushed phone call. He runs a small contracting crew, Gus's Ground and Gravel. He did my neighbor's retaining wall a few years back. Brenda tried to fine him for his truck leaking oil on the street, and he just laughed at her. He's your guy. I met Gus at a Greasy Spoon diner halfway across town, a place where the coffee was strong and the waitresses called you Hun. He was exactly as Dave had described him. A mountain of a man in his late 50s, with a formidable beer belly, a sun-weathered face, and hands that looked like they could crush rocks. He was wearing a dusty flannel shirt and a faded baseball cap that said, "I dig it." He listened to me, his expression unreadable, as I laid out my technical specifications over a plate of bacon and eggs. "So, let me get this straight," he said, wiping his mouth with a napkin after I finished. "You want a 2,000-gallon food-grade polyethylene cistern buried in your backyard. You want it tapped directly into your 4-inch water main post-meter. You want a half-horsepower booster pump, a sediment pre-filter, and a secondary carbon filtration system. And you want it all wired into a standalone control panel in your garage." He took a long sip of coffee. "What for? You planning on surviving the zombie apocalypse in style?" "Something like that," I said, leaning forward. "My apocalypse has a name. It's Brenda." And I told him everything. The petunias, the emergency tank, the sprinklers gone wild, the cops, the Facebook post, the paint violation. I laid it all out, the whole sordid, ridiculous saga. As I spoke, a change came over Gus's face. The stony neutrality cracked. A corner of his mouth twitched upwards. By the time I got to the part about the paint, he was leaning back in the booth, a low chuckle rumbling in his chest. When I finished, he was shaking his head, a huge grin spreading across his face. "Brenda," he said, the name full of grudging respect for a worthy adversary. "Oh yeah, I know Brenda. Back when we did that retaining wall on Elm Street, she tried to issue my crew a written warning because our porta-potty was, and I quote, an unapproved temporary structure of a discordant color. The woman is a legend." He slapped his hand on the table, making the salt shaker jump. "Kid, I like your style. This is the most beautiful screw you I've ever heard of. I'm in." "You think you can get the permits from the city without raising a red flag with the HOA?" I asked. Gus snorted. "The girls down at the planning department love me, and the HOA doesn't get copied on subterranean plumbing permits unless it involves a shared sewer line. As far as the law is concerned, what you do in your own yard, with your own water main, is between you, the city, and your God. The HOA can pound sand." He leaned in conspiratorially. "And listen, that half-horse pump you wanted? Let's upgrade you. Full 1-horse, top of the line. A little noisier when it kicks on, but the pressure, you'll be able to peel paint with your garden hose. No extra charge. Call it a professional courtesy." We shook on it. His grip was like a vice. An unholy alliance had been forged over lukewarm coffee and a shared hatred for petty tyrants. My army had arrived. Operation Hydraulic Overkill was a go. The Monday morning of the following week, the war began. It did not begin with a trumpet blast, but with the deafening, ground-shaking roar of a diesel engine firing to life at 7:01 a.m. I was sitting on my front porch in a lawn chair, a fresh mug of coffee in hand, like a general watching his artillery take its position. Gus's army had arrived in force. A massive, bright yellow backhoe was parked on the street. Its mechanical arm curled like a sleeping scorpion. Behind it was a 10-ton dump truck, and behind that, 2 dusty Ford F-250S with the Gus's Ground and Gravel logo on the side. The cul-de-sac, normally a tranquil sea of beige and asphalt, now looked like a staging area for an invasion. It was beautiful. My neighbors emerged from their homes like startled meerkats, blinking in the morning sun, drawn by the cacophony. Dave gave me a wide-eyed look from his doorway that was equal parts terror and awe. I gave him a slow, deliberate wink. And then I saw her, Brenda. She was standing on her perfect lawn, wearing a silk dressing gown, her face a thundercloud of disbelief and rage. This was not in the bylaws. This was chaos. Gus, magnificent in his dusty glory, climbed down from the backhoe and strolled over to me. "Morning, General," he grunted. "Ready to make some noise?" "That's what I'm paying you for, Gus," I said with a grin. The week that followed was a masterpiece of controlled, permitted, and utterly glorious disruption. It was a symphony of suburban torment, and I was its conductor. Day one was the excavation. The backhoe operator, a surgical artist named Sal, carved a massive 10-foot-deep pit in my backyard with surprising precision. But the side effect was a mountain of dirt, clay, and rock that Gus's crew piled onto a giant tarp on my front lawn. My yard, once a source of HOA fines, was now a legitimate disaster area. Brenda was out there at least 5 times, taking photos with her iPad from the safety of the sidewalk. I imagined her frantically searching the CC and ours for a rule about the maximum allowable height of a dirt pile. Day 2 was the trench. A smaller, angrier machine called a trencher was brought in. It sliced a neat 2-foot-deep line from the pit in the backyard all the way to the water main access point near the street. The noise it made was a high-pitched, soul-shredding shriek that could likely be heard from space. I saw Carol from down the street cover her ears as she scurried to her car. I waved cheerfully. Day 3 was the arrival of the cistern. This was the centerpiece, the coup de grace. A flatbed truck arrived carrying my 2,000-gallon tank. It wasn't some ugly agricultural tank. I'd paid extra for a sleek, futuristic-looking cobalt blue vessel that looked more like a piece of a spaceship than a water container. A small crane lifted it high into the air, over my roof, and lowered it gently into the pit. It was an event. Half the neighborhood was out watching. It was the most exciting thing to happen in Whispering Pines since a flock of geese had pooped on the community pool cover. Throughout it all, my routine was the same. I'd set up my lawn chair, my laptop, and a cooler of drinks. I did my work, occasionally shouting encouragement to Gus's crew. "Looking good, Sal. That's a mighty fine hole." Or, "Give her the beans, Frank," to the guy on the shrieking trencher. Every time Brenda stormed out to glare at me, I'd raise my glass of lemonade in a silent toast. Dave would skulk over during his lunch break, providing updates from the front lines. "They're losing it on the Facebook group, Alex," he'd whisper, eyes darting around nervously. "Brenda's trying to get the board to issue an emergency stop work order. She's claiming the vibrations are causing foundational distress to her garden gnomes." "Are they?" I'd ask with genuine curiosity. "No, but she's got Gerald going door to door with a petition." By Friday, the heavy work was done. The tank was in, the trenches were filled, and my lawn was a lumpy, muddy mess of freshly turned earth. The system was plumbed and wired. All that was left was the final inspection from the city and the landscaping repair. The silence that descended on the neighborhood that evening was almost as jarring as the noise had been. The official notice for the emergency HOA meeting was taped to my door that night. It was scheduled for Saturday evening at the community clubhouse. The agenda was simple and stark. Discussion and vote on cease and desist order for unapproved major construction at 112 Arbor Lane and review of associated violations. My address. My trial. The clubhouse was packed. I don't think I'd ever seen it this full, not even for the annual chili cook-off. The air was thick with the scent of cheap coffee, stale popcorn from the machine in the corner, and palpable tension. Gus had insisted on coming. For moral support, he'd said, though he looked more like my personal security. He stood in the back, his massive arms crossed, looking deeply unimpressed by the decor. Dave and his wife sat with me near the front, Dave nervously shredding a napkin into a small pile of white fluff. Brenda stood at a flimsy podium, dressed in a power suit, flanked by her husband Gerald and the HOA treasurer. She looked confident, like a prosecutor who knew the jury was already on her side. She tapped the microphone, and a piercing squeal of feedback cut through the room. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she began, her voice smooth and practiced. "We are facing a crisis in our community. A crisis of noise, of disruption, and of one resident's blatant disregard for the rules that protect our peaceful way of life and our property values." She clicked a remote, and a projector screen flickered to life. The first image was a dramatic close-up shot of the backhoe's bucket, looking like the jaws of a metal dinosaur. "For 1 week," Brenda narrated, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "Our lives have been upended by this. The noise has been unbearable. The mess, unacceptable." Click. A photo of my dirt pile. Click. A photo of the trench scarring my lawn. Click. A photo of me, sitting in my lawn chair, giving the camera a smug thumbs up. I had to admit, it was a good picture. "This project was undertaken without the approval, or even the notification, of your homeowners association," she continued. "It is an eyesore, a nuisance, and a dangerous precedent. That is why the board is asking for a vote tonight to issue an immediate and binding cease and desist order to halt this monstrosity, and to approve a daily fine of $200, retroactive to the start date, until the property is restored to its original approved condition." A murmur went through the crowd. This was it, the public execution. Brenda smiled, sensing victory. "Are there any questions before we vote?" Slowly I raised my hand. Brenda's eyes locked onto me. "Alex, I assume you have something to say in your defense?" "Not a defense, Brenda," I said, standing up. "More of a presentation." I pulled a small remote from my pocket. Gus gave me a subtle nod from the back of the room. "You see, your presentation was lovely. Really, the pictures were very dramatic. But I feel like it was missing some important context." I aimed my remote at the projector. With a soft click, her picture of my smiling face vanished, replaced by a crystal-clear, high-resolution photo I had taken that fateful Saturday morning. The shot of her massive hose, connected directly to our emergency water tank. I had added a title in a bold, clean font. "Exhibit A, Grand Theft H2O." The room, which had been murmuring, fell completely silent. You could hear a pin drop. Brenda's face went white. "Before we discuss my dirt pile," I said, my voice calm and clear, "I think we should first discuss why that dirt pile exists. It exists because our HOA president decided that her petunias were more important than our community's ability to fight a fire during a historic heat wave. She drained our shared safety resource for personal gain." Click. The screen changed to a Google Earth satellite image of our street from that day, which I had purchased for $20 online. Brenda's lawn was a radioactive green oasis in a desert of brown dormant grass. I'd circled it in red. The title read, "Exhibit B, The Oasis of Selfishness." A few nervous titters rippled through the audience. Click. The next slide was a screenshot from the county's emergency management website, showing the extreme fire danger warning that had been in effect. Exhibit C, the motive for my vigilantism. "She created a safety hazard," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "A profound one. I solved it. Then I was punished for it. I was issued fines for the state of my lawn, a lawn that was dry because I was, following the rules. I was ordered to spend thousands of dollars to repaint my house as a form of retaliation. Click. The final glorious slide. It was a scanned copy of my fully approved, officially stamped, and completely legal city permit for subterranean water storage system installation. The city seal was large and beautiful. The title, Exhibit D, perfectly legal, perfectly petty. The titters turned into outright laughter. Gus let out a booming chuckle from the back. Dave was staring at me, his shredded napkin forgotten, his mouth hanging open. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, turning to face the crowd, "Brenda is right about one thing. My project is disruptive, it's also expensive. But what it is, fundamentally, is a permanent solution to a problem that our HOA leadership created. It guarantees my family will have water. It guarantees I'll never be at the mercy of someone who thinks the bylaws are her personal sword and shield. She wants to fine me for protecting myself from her." I paused, letting it all sink in. So no, I will not be ceasing or desisting. In fact, I have a counterproposal. My heart was pounding. This was the kill shot. Gus, the gentleman in the back who has been running this very loud, very messy project, has drawn up a quote. A bulk rate quote. For installing smaller, more affordable backup systems for every cluster of 4 homes in this neighborhood. We could use the HOA's reserve funds, the same funds Brenda uses to pay for lawyers to write threatening letters about mailbox colors, to make our entire community safer and more self-reliant. We can make Whispering Pines a place that's actually prepared for an emergency, not just a place with really nice flower beds. The room erupted. It wasn't just laughter anymore. It was a wave of righteous indignation. And it wasn't directed at me. People were on their feet, shouting. Old Man Hemlock from the end of the street was yelling about how Brenda had tried to fine him because his garden hose was the wrong shade of green. A woman near the front was talking about a notice she'd received about her kid's unapproved sidewalk chalk art. The dam of resentment Brenda had built over years of petty tyranny was breaking. In the chaos, someone yelled, "I move for a vote of no confidence in Brenda as HOA president." "Second," another voice roared. It was a landslide, a public humiliation. Brenda stood at the podium, speechless and defeated, as a sea of hands went up against her. Her reign was over. In the dazed aftermath, as people were still milling about, a shaken but resolute Dave was nominated to be the interim president. He looked at me with pure panic in his eyes, but to his eternal credit, he accepted. Brenda, without another word, gathered her things and swept out of the clubhouse, Gerald trailing in her wake like a sad little dinghy. The month that followed was the quietest, most peaceful month I'd had since moving to Whispering Pines. My lawn was resodded by Gus's crew, greener and healthier than ever before. Near my air conditioning unit, almost hidden by a newly planted gardenia bush, was a sleek gray metal box. The control panel for my system. My silent, humming monument to spite. Dave, bless his heart, was a surprisingly effective HOA president. The first thing he did was declare a 3-month moratorium on all aesthetic violation notices. The neighborhood breathed a collective sigh of relief. The water project was his main focus now. One warm evening, I was sitting on my back porch, admiring the sunset. Gus's truck pulled into my driveway. He got out, holding 2 cold beers. "Came by to check the pressure," he said, handing me one. "She's holding steady at a perfect 65 psi. You could wash a car in 30 seconds with that." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sky turn from orange to purple. "So," he said finally, "how's the quiet life treating you, General?" I took a long swallow of beer, the cold liquid a perfect counterpoint to the warm air. I thought about the noise, the dirt, the rage, the cops, the public showdown, and the sheer glorious absurdity of it all. I had come here seeking peace, and had instead started a revolution with a backhoe. "It's a lot louder than I expected," I said, a slow grin spreading across my face. "But the water pressure is fantastic." We clinked our bottles together, a toast to the chaos. The quiet I had found wasn't the quiet I had been looking for, but somehow it was infinitely more satisfying.